Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final week of the course. It's called Week 8, Creative Nonfiction. This week, we'll be listening to a podcast by This American Life. Maybe some of you have heard of it. We'll be discussing that podcast in the discussions. We'll also learn a little bit about what makes a work creative nonfiction. How is that different than the other forms of literature we have discussed this semester, and how it kind of is a little bit similar to an academic essay, one that you might be familiar with if you've taken a previous writing course here at APUS. So basically, creative nonfiction contains many of the same components that we've seen earlier. For example, there could be basically characters. There can be a plot structure. There can be similes, metaphors, verses. There even can be dialogue and maybe a performance. The only rule really is that it's based upon something that's happened in reality. So one thing I wanted to point out to you is that oftentimes creative nonfiction can be seen in comedy. So I would suggest, and many others would suggest the same, is that comedians employ creative nonfiction when they tell stories. So they're making you laugh, but often they also are making a point. And one of the first authors that did this was Mark Twain. And many comedians employ this techniques when they do their comedy shows as well. And that is creative nonfiction. So now, creative nonfictional works do not have to employ all of these rhetorical techniques. However, they often are employed to prove a point. So let's go back to the comedian again. The comedian can try to gather your emotions to make a point. Pathos. And so there is a video example that shows this being employed for a speech, and that was a speech that is creative nonfiction, because the speaker is using his relationship with his mother to explain how important it is to keep and appreciate the relationships in your families that you have developed as a young person. And so, as you can tell, these students are quite moved by a speech. And so he's employing pathos in his discussion. But there's also ethos. And this is where the writer establishes his or her own authority. So basically, the example that is here is that a teacher explains what she went through as a teacher and as an educator to prove and explain why she needs to quit her career. And this would also be creative nonfiction because she is telling a story. She is giving us her history, but she's also employing a good deal of ethos, and I would say a little bit of pathos and logos, which is our next rhetorical technique. And this one is quite interesting. It's Steve Jobs. He's explaining how he came to invent the Apple computer. It's a story. However, it also has a point. The point is determination and grit in order to succeed. And obviously, he has a lot of ethos, but he also employs logos. He shows how this logically came to be. So these are the same rhetorical techniques that you do use in many argumentative works. Well, creative nonfiction does this as well. It not only employs stories, it not only employs many of the literary techniques that we've learned about all this semester, but it also employs many of the techniques that you use in academic writing. So take a look at this particular diagram right here. You have academic writing on one side, you have fiction on the other, and then creative writing, creative nonfiction, kind of employs both much of the time. But like I said earlier, there aren't any rules really. The only rule is it's nonfiction. And that's what you'll notice today when you discuss our podcast this week. And the podcast that we will be working on and listening to and reading is the latest version, the latest podcast from This American Life. Now, you can choose any of the stories that you like. Let's look at the transcription for this one back in November. There are a number of different stories that you can use, that you can discuss. Usually they're broken up into acts, so you can discuss Act 1 or Act 2, or even Act 3 if there's an Act 3. It's your choice. Then you read it, then you go back to the discussion, and you decide what the main point of the story is. That would be the theme. Then you discuss some of the rhetorical techniques that the author or podcaster used to get the theme across to the audience. So it could be any of the techniques that we've learned earlier, for example, voicing tone, imagery, dialogue, any of those, but it also could be employing some of the rhetorical appeals that I just discussed with you. And then finally, you're going to discuss whether or not you thought the story was effective. In your responses, you must demonstrate that you've actually read the story that your classmate has used and argue for or against your classmate's point. So that's it for the week. I did want to add to this that we are also happy that you made it through the course. We're also proud of you. We hope you enjoyed the literature you got to read this semester. Hopefully you learned a thing or two. And we are absolutely looking forward to having you in one of our other literature courses. There's such a great variety to choose from. We hope to see you again. Congratulations and best of luck.